Hi, I'm Vanessa. I'm not much into spirits and ghosts, so you can't say this will be a gothic story or a horror story, even when it is a real-life story. The incident I'm about to tell you today changed the way I think about spirits and ghosts. This incident happened after I shifted to my new apartment in New York City. I was excited. I unpacked all my stuff that morning, took some rest, and in the evening, I went out to meet a few friends who had been living in New York. It was a nice, fun evening, and I had a good time having dinner with my old friends. It was past midnight when I returned home, and when I entered home, I noticed a note fall off my door while shutting it. It read, "You need to be careful." I found it odd, but I was scared. I checked if all the windows and doors of my house were properly locked, and I went to sleep. That night, I felt a very cold breeze around me, even when the windows were shut, but I ignored it and went back to sleep. The next day, I got up and saw a mark on my wrist, a burn mark. I took some ice out of the fridge and rubbed it on my wrist for 5 to 10 minutes. I felt like someone was holding my wrist so tightly that my wrist became all red. So I thought maybe go see a nearby doctor. The doctor saw the wound and gave me a gel to apply on it, and said that it'll be fine in some days. When I got back to my apartment, there was a note laying in front of the door and it read, "We are coming." I was shocked and ran inside my house. There were weird things happening. I was terrified. I passed the next day thinking what all this was about, and why was it all happening with me. Around 11:30 p.m., somebody knocked at my door. I wondered who that would be as no one really knew the address I had moved to. I could see a shadow from the gap between the door and the floor, and that scared me even more. So I tried calling my parents, but they were not picking my calls or replying to any of my messages. I kept trying, and the person outside kept knocking. Finally, with great courage, I decided to open the door. It was my parents. I felt relieved and hugged them. I welcomed them inside my house and made them sit on the sofa. After a while, someone knocked on the door again. This time, I wasn't scared because my parents were with me. When I opened the door, there were 2 policemen standing and asked if I was Miss Vanessa. I said, "Yes, I'm Vanessa, but what's the matter?" One of the policemen in a deep voice said, "Sorry ma'am, but your parents died in a car crash 2 days back, and these are their phone and your father's wallet. You might have to come to the police station with us." I said to the policeman, "No sir, this might be wrong information, because my parents are here with me." And as I turned around, opening the door fully to let the policeman see my parents, there was nobody on the sofa. There was only a note which read, "We are home." I was horrified with what happened, but I had to go with the policeman and complete all the formalities. I came home and cried a lot that night. Now, I have a normal life and I have moved on, but I always have a question in my mind. If my parents were really there that day?
Have you ever been so worked up or stressed out, having issues at home as well as at work, a lot going on in your mind, and all you can do to help yourself is to just go for a walk to cool off? Well, it happens with me sometimes. When there's anything troubling me, I usually take a walk in the woods, and then once I feel better, I come back and sort things out for myself. It was during the exams of my final graduation year, and though I was prepared with my studies, I was stressed about it. It was winter season. A day before my exams were to start, I decided to go for a walk in the woods and let the cool winds ease me. As I walked into the woods, I looked back and I could see my footprints in the snow, as the ground was all covered in snow. It just looked beautiful. I kept walking, not fast but in a normal strolling pace. It was cold, but my sweater kept me warm. As I walked deeper in the woods, it got colder, and I considered walking back home. Suddenly, I looked around and spotted a trap to catch an animal. The woods were very beautiful and home to many animals and birds. I had to destroy the trap so no animal could be caught in it. I had to be quick because whoever set the trap he would be pretty mad at me for destroying his plan to hunt. I rushed towards the trap and destroyed it as fast as I could. I quickly turned back and walked away from there so I don't get caught by the hunter. I decided to go home, and as I walked back, I was following the same way I came through, but it felt a little new. I noticed my footprints had been erased. What? Has someone been following me the whole time? For the footprints to disappear like this, either a strong wind had blown, which covered it, or someone erased it on purpose. Now I was very confused. I stood there for over 5 minutes thinking about what to do next. Why would someone follow me? Why would anyone cover my tracks? I could resonate the scene to what I saw in one of the movies. That's what a serial killer would do if he didn't want others to locate his victim. Wait, am I being followed by a serial killer? No, it can't be. These are just some bad thoughts, I told myself. Suddenly, my phone vibrated. I jumped in fear to the vibration of my own phone. There was fear all over my face. Even an ant would scare me at that moment. I checked my phone, and there was a message. But not just any message. It was a message from an unknown number. It was a picture of me. A picture of me when I was sitting and destroying the trap. Wow. So I was being watched. Now I was so afraid. Was I being watched? Or was I being followed right from my home? There was no time to think, and I turned in the other direction and I ran towards getting out of the woods. I ran so fast. While running, I didn't realize in which direction I was heading to. I didn't know if I was being chased or not, but I just kept running. At last, I sighted a cabin in the woods. I ran towards it, hoping I would knock and find someone living there so I could get some help. The cabin looked so old and shabby and creepy, but I was really scared, and I needed help, at least someone to be with, and know that I'm not alone. As I ran towards the cabin, the door opened like it was expecting me to run straight inside. I immediately stopped suddenly on a high speed, landed me on the ground. But I immediately stood up and ran towards another direction. All my brain told me at that moment was going into that cabin is a bad idea. I kept running and running. I was so tired and afraid. My heart was racing fast. I still didn't know whether I was being chased or followed or what. But I was afraid because I could sense something was very wrong, and someone out there was scaring the crap out of me. While running, I heard some movement coming towards me from behind. I immediately dashed forward out of fear. But unfortunately, I ran into a big tree in front of me. Colliding with a tree knocked me out totally. Now I was on the ground, helpless and open to any harm or danger. While on the ground, my eyes were so heavy, but I could hear someone walking towards me and seeing him standing over me and watching me. But my eyes had become so weak that I couldn't see his face at all. Next, I woke up and found myself in the hospital. "You are awake?" asked the doctor. He smiled and said, "I hit my head real bad." "You shouldn't be out in the woods all by yourself, you know. It can be dangerous," he said. I asked him who brought me and how did I get in here. He replied he didn't know what had happened and that I was found at the roadside, and some police officers brought me to the hospital. They also had no idea about how I reached the roadside, whereas I remember going unconscious in the woods. But they were down the hallway waiting for me so I could be questioned, at least to know what was going on. I was happy I was safe, and right now the police were the saviors I needed, because everything happened to me, from the chase to the bleak glimpse of the mysterious person and how I got to the hospital, was so unclear. I needed answers to all of it, or at least someone who could help me find answers. Don't forget to subscribe and hit the bell icon for more videos. Six university students happened to be close friends with each other, more like an inseparable group. They used to hang out together, study together, and have fun together. Larry, Matt, and Jerry were the boys who lived in the boys' wing of the university hostel, and the girls, Sally, Eva, and Ashley, lived in the girls' wing. One day, Jerry got invited to a night party, which was to be hosted across town. The party was hosted outside the university premises, and it was going to be a night party with only a few people invited. Jerry and Sally got invited and were given a pass. Larry and Matt wanted to attend also, but only someone with a pass could invite someone else. Others didn't want to be left behind, so they all decided to get into the party through Jerry and Sally. The school authorities strongly warned the students against going out of the university premises during late hours for safety reasons. But this didn't stop the six of them from going out, as they always wanted to go for the thrill and fun. The night of the party, Sally didn't want to go. She was a little scared because of the theme, which was titled Slaughterhouse Fun Party, and also because the party was kind of a secret. Very few people were invited from their university, but Jerry encouraged her to come along, saying she wasn't going to be alone. The six of them would be going, so there was nothing to fear. They got ready and sneaked out of the university premises. They reached the party. It was a 20-minute drive away from the university premises. The party was fun, as it was hosted in the hall of a big mansion with many rooms in it. There were lots of drinks, and people were getting to know each other. As the party was on, mini games were being played, and each winner was given a special cocktail after winning the game. As the party went on, Sally noticed that every 15 minutes a game was held, and those who won drank the special cocktail. And just after a while of gulping down that drink, they would go to the restroom. But the weird thing was that she hadn't seen any of the winners coming out of the restroom or in the party. It was like after drinking, they went to the restroom and never came out. In another 15 minutes, the next game started, and this time, Matt decided to play. Although Sally warned him not to participate in it, but she couldn't find a valid reason to convince him from playing. Matt played, and he won. He was offered the special cocktail. Before Sally could reach him to stop him from drinking, he had already consumed it. He smiled and continued dancing with the crowd. Sally explained her observations to Jerry and Eva. After hearing this, Jerry, Eva, and Sally decided to observe the next game. Suddenly, they saw Matt walking towards the restroom. Jerry went to him and asked him where he was going. He replied he was going to the restroom and that he would be back shortly. He went to the restroom, but after several minutes, when Matt didn't come out, it was like Sally's observations were coming out to be true. Jerry, Eva, and Sally went to the restroom to go check what was going on. And after checking out the restrooms, they found no one. Now that was strange. Matt was not in the restroom even when he had just walked in a while back, and the three of us were waiting for him right outside. They hadn't seen him walk out, so where could he have been? As they were about to go and check outside, they heard Matt's voice through one of the walls of the restroom. Jerry walked in the direction from where the voice came, and he saw a slight opening in the wall, which meant there was a secret room behind the restroom. Jerry opened the door of the room, and they all went inside. They saw Matt, along with a few people, lying unconscious in the secret room. They quickly untied Matt and brought him out of the secret room. They knew They were in big trouble now. They ran back to the party to find Ashley and Larry and inform them about what they just saw. But Larry was already drunk, too drunk to understand a single word. Ashley and Jerry carried him and tried to leave the party, but they discovered the door of the mansion was already locked from the outside. The windows were shut, and the window glasses were unbreakable too. At that moment, they discovered the truth about the party. Like the theme, it was a slaughterhouse, and they were about to be slaughtered one by one. Jerry called the police. He tried to explain the situation to the police, but the music at the party was too loud that they couldn't hear him. While they were talking about a plan to leave the mansion, Ashley noticed a smoke coming from one of the rooms in the mansion. As the smoke grew bigger, those who inhaled the smoke began to fall unconscious. At that moment, everyone knew they were into deep trouble. They ran helter-skelter, trying to save themselves. 6 men came out of one of the rooms with a mask and aprons holding a knife. Next thing, they began to stab people. It was a massacre, bloodbath, and everyone panicked. One of the men in the mask caught Larry and pinned him on the ground. Before he could stab Larry, Jerry came from behind and pushed the man away from Larry. The knife fell off his hand, and Larry and Jerry punched him hard that he fell unconscious. As the other men walked closer to finish off the rest, there was a loud explosion at the back of the mansion. The next thing, men with guns trooped in. They were dressed like a SWAT team. It was the FBI. Repeatedly, they shot down the men with knives and one was rescued. It was discovered that those men were a group of serial killers who killed people and sold their organs for money, and the FBI had been on their case for a while now. That night was a really bad experience of their lives. At the university, all the 6 got suspended for going against the school rules. Eva and Sally had to visit the therapist every weekend to get over the trauma. Though the others were able to hold it together, it was still a sad experience for everyone. James was in his early 30s, tall, handsome, with strong classic features and thick black hair. After 3 years in the business, his private detective agency had a good reputation in the city. He was single and in love. The only drawback here was that he was in love with a married woman. One usual day in office, James was sitting in his cabin, sipping on coffee and reading the newspaper. Somebody knocked at the door. "Come in," he said, keeping his cup of coffee on the table. A slender, middle-aged man with thin hair and rimless glasses, dressed in an expensive suit, opened the door and walked in. James got up from behind his desk and shook the newcomer's hand. "Please, sit down. I'm James, director of the agency. What can I do for you?" he said with a half-anxious expression, which he had practiced in the mirror many times. "My name is Henry Roberts," he spoke in a low voice. "You have been highly recommended to me. I have a very sensitive matter to discuss, and I've heard your agency is very discreet." James acknowledged the words with a modest wave of his hand and asked him what did he need help with. Henry explained, "I suspect my wife is cheating on me, but I want to be sure. I want you to investigate. Follow her when she leaves our apartment and let me know where she goes and who she sees." James said, "We can give you a complete and detailed report. When would you like it?" "I guess 2 weeks will be good enough, unless you think you should follow her longer," said Henry. James agreed, saying 2 weeks may be okay. Henry handed over his card to James, which had his address. Along with that, he also gave an envelope with his wife's picture and a check for the advance payment. Henry already knew the rates of James's agency. "What is your wife's name?" asked James. "Sharon Roberts." James held his breath. Sharon Roberts was his lover's name. This man must be her husband, he thought to himself. He opened the envelope and looked at the picture and the check, hoping to gain time and recover his cool. Henry supposed his seriousness was a desire to start work on the job at once. I see you're a man of few words. I'm sure you'll give me a thorough report next time I see you. Good day. James finally found his voice. Good day, Mr. Henry, he said, getting up from his chair and walking his new client to the door. After Henry was gone, James sat down again at his desk. He was in a state of shock. He opened the lower right-hand drawer and took out a bottle of scotch and a glass. He poured himself a drink, and while sipping it, pondered how to handle this tricky situation. So his new client was Sharon's husband. Not much to look at, he thought. No wonder she wants to get a divorce and marry me. He knew he couldn't give this client a true report. Still, he had to make a report. He decided to give his operative, David, the job and to stay away from Sharon during the 2 weeks of the investigation. He would tell her about her husband's suspicions later, after he had delivered the report, and they would have a good laugh then. David was a young man who had recently started to work. 2 weeks later, David, eager and in love with his job, came into James's office. I finished the Henry Roberts investigation. I'll have the report on your desk first thing tomorrow morning. Great. Do me a favor now, will you? Call Mr. Henry and ask him to come to the office tomorrow morning at 10 a.m. You got it. See you tomorrow, said David. But the next morning, when Henry walked into the office, David hadn't finished the report yet. Good morning, Mr. Henry. Sit down. Would you like a cup of coffee? Said James, trying to gain some time until his operative brought in the report. That would be nice, thanks. James poured scalding hot coffee into 2 cups, placing the sugar and cream within Henry's reach. When they had started drinking the coffee, David walked into the office and after greeting Henry, gave a folder to his boss. Quickly, James took out the original copy and gave it to his client, keeping the duplicate copy face down in front of him. Henry read the report without a change of expression. When he finished, he looked at James directly and said, 3. Beg your pardon? James asked surprisingly. I was afraid of something like this. 3 of them in only 2 weeks. What are you talking about? Your report. It's really complete. It shows that she had 3 lovers in 2 weeks. James choked on his coffee, spilling some on the duplicate copy of the report in front of him. He exclaimed, What? Oh, pardon me. And using the excuse of wiping the coffee from each page of the report, started reading it. When he had finished, he was stunned and felt weak. With an effort, he raised his eyes to the face of his client. Henry had a grin on his face. With a knowing look and subtly mocking tone, he said, Don't you believe that there are some women you just can't trust? Hi, my name is Leo, and today I want to share the weirdest and scariest experience of my life. I live with my parents in the city. My grad school is just a few minutes walking distance from my apartment. I walk down to school with my friend Nick, who lives close by. We usually take the same route home, through the not-so-busy roads around which only a few people live. One evening, while Nick and me were walking back home from school, a stranger walked up to us and said he needed help. We asked him what was the matter, but turned out he had just come to beg for money. He told us he wanted money to feed his family. We ignored him and walked away in the direction of our homes. The next day, while we were returning home from school via the same route, we saw a crowd gathered on the roadside. It was at the same place where we had met the beggar the previous evening. We went to check what was going on. It so happened that a poor man had committed suicide along with his family. Nobody knew the reason why he had done so. Some said he didn't have money to feed his family, and that made him take such a grave step. It was the same man who came to us asking for money. Nick and me looked at each other, and we were full of guilt. We were sad. However, we walked back home. That night, after dinner, I went to Nick's place. I wasn't feeling too good. It was a weird feeling. I was constantly thinking about that beggar and what had happened. His thoughts were haunting me. So I decided to discuss this with Nick, as that would have made me feel better. When I got there, I told him what I was going through, and I wasn't surprised when he told me that he felt the same way. So we decided to divert our minds and play some video games. We played for hours and realized it was too late. I had to get back home, and Nick had to go to bed. It was 12 midnight when I came home. I got to my room and slid into my bed. After a while, the doorbell rang. I sat up at once. I called out my mother and father. None of them responded. The doorbell rang again. Suddenly, a deep voice came from within me. It can be him, the beggar whom I saw, who wanted help from me. As I started walking down the stairs, the doorbell rang the third time. I peeped through the window to see who it was. It was the beggar who died that day. I was taken aback, shocked. I was very frightened to open the door. I stood there thinking what to do. After a few minutes, when I couldn't hear a sound, I peeped through the window again. This time I saw the beggar with the family. I was even more scared. They were dead. How could they be at my doorstep? I wondered. Suddenly, there was a loud knock at the door. I gathered the courage and walked up to open the door. As I opened the door, there was no one, but only a letter on the doormat. I picked the letter, and as I was opening it, the phone rang. I shut the door, and on my way towards the phone, I again saw the beggar with his family staring at me through the window. He had a paper in his hand which read, "Help." I ran away from there and picked the phone. A man answered from the other end. "Help him, and you would be safe, or else." And the phone hung up. I thought if this was a prank by a friend, and if I was thinking too much about the beggar. But I was pretty terrified about what was going on. I opened the letter, which I picked from the doormat. It had an address printed on it. 356A Beckler Street, North End, Mexico. I thought to myself, what if he was not really dead and he had come to ask for help again? So I took some money from my wallet and was going to give it to the beggar. I walked to the window, but there was no one. Now I was curious to know what was happening, even though I was scared. So I took out my bike to get to the address on the letter. I checked the time in my watch. It was 2 o'clock in the night. I thought of calling Nick, but then changed my mind, as I didn't want to call him this late. The weather was cool and pleasant. As I reached the address, I found that the house was small. It looked mysterious and spooky from the outside. I knocked at the door. No one answered. I pushed the door a little and realized it was open. As I moved inside to check if anyone was there, the lights were switched on at once and all sung, "Happy Birthday!" All my family members and friends gave me a big surprise. Nick was also there. I was amazed. At once, I felt a sigh of relief that the spooky-looking house was my birthday surprise place. I was so terrified after all that had happened that I had totally forgotten it was my birthday. But now I was in a comfort zone. After the cake cutting, while we were enjoying the delicious snacks, I asked my friends, why did they call and scare off me? They laughed at me and said, they never called. They just kept the letter with the address on the doormat, rang the doorbell 3 times and left. This kind of left me petrified. I went into a deep thought as to was it really the beggar and his family, or was it my illusion? Who knocked on the door? And who was the person who called me and asked me to help them and then hung up? I took Nick to a corner and told him all that had happened, but he had no clue either. Though I was happy about my family and friends giving me such a nice birthday surprise, this scary incident had left me with unanswered questions. The next day, I went to the place where the beggar lived, but there was nobody there. Just an old, half-broken hut with old, wrecked furniture. I tried tracking the phone call I received that night, but there were no records. And to this day, I've not been able to figure out how it all happened and who called. Don't forget to subscribe and hit the bell icon for more videos.